I've got the joy of the Lord, and it's working in me. I've got the joy of the Lord, and it's showing in me.
When Christ left this earth, he left his mission to some individuals. There were a certain select group of men that Christ had trained for around 3 years so that they would be able to carry on his mission, so that they would be able to continue to do what he had been doing, and that is seeking and saving those that are lost. In Matthew chapter 28, verses 18, 19, and 20, what we see here is Christ commissioning his disciples. In reality, he's commissioning us too, that as disciples, that we would go out into the world and make disciples. Now, as we begin reading through the New Testament, especially in the book of Acts, what we're going to see is we're going to see God's people. We're going to see especially these men that he kind of left in charge, the 12 apostles. We're going to see them begin to change the lives of people. And they would do this by teaching Christ. They would do this by showing them the ways of Christ. And what would often happen naturally as people would give their life to Christ, as they were being baptized, and we see that really in Acts chapter 2 as this began. What we see there at the latter part of Acts chapter 2 is really a natural commitment. So they have a natural commitment to God, but also they have a natural commitment to one another. Now, one of the marks of being a disciple is the idea of unity. The idea of unity. Now, unity is one of the marks that separates disciples from the world. Now, in no way am I suggesting that Christians, that we are never going to have an argument, that we're never going to disagree, because arguments are going to happen, disagreements will come up. And if you've been a Christian long enough, you're aware of that, you know that. But it's not that we're going to have disagreements, it's how we respond to those disagreements. How do we respond to those that don't agree exactly with the way that we believe, of our opinions? How do we respond to those individuals? And the way that we respond, again, should separate us from the world. So when Jesus was praying in John chapter 17 for his disciples, he prayed that all of his disciples would be one. He said, even as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they may also be in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me. So Jesus says, if unity is seen, if unity is practiced, if unity is recognized among believers, then the world would know that it is God who sent forth his one and only Son. You see, the world knows that people are evil, they're untrustworthy, and people are often difficult to get along with. So when you have a group of people who are different in race and careers, financial backgrounds, so many other backgrounds, and just really the list goes on and on and on, when the world sees this group of people living in unity, not conformity, but living in unity, they'll become interested. They naturally will. When the world looks at the church, though, and they see nothing but a group of people that fight over traditions, that fight over gossip, that fight and argue over things that, let's be honest, that really don't even matter. When the world looks at the church and they see racism and prejudice and discrimination, when they see churches that are just splitting left and right over opinions, then friends, it's no wonder that the church doesn't have an impact on this world. You want to know why the world is so evil? Well, you can begin by looking at the division that is in the church. If we each took seriously the command to unity, the command that Jesus himself prayed for before he left this earth, as serious as Jesus took it, maybe the world would look a little bit different. You see, Paul knew in his writings, he knew the influence of unity. He knew the influence that our unity had on the world. That's why in the book of Philippians chapter 4, where he urged those two ladies, you got to start getting along. You need to live in harmony. He goes on to say that these women have helped him in the cause of the gospel. In other words, these women are vital. These women are important because they help spread the gospel. And he reminds him to rejoice in the Lord always. And then he says in verse 5, let your gentle spirit be known to all people. When we lose unity within the church, it's usually, most often, because something has become more important to us than Jesus, or someone has become more important to us than Jesus. It's usually because something or someone has become more important to us than the gospel. Dr. Sinclair Ferguson, he was a Scottish theologian, once said this truth: the gospel is a message of reconciliation and peace with God. How can non-Christians be convinced that Christ reconciles us to God if we can't even be reconciled to each other? Truth is, God is more concerned about the unity of the church than he is a program in the church. He is more concerned about unity in the church than he is your parking lot, the size of your church, what it looks like, the order that you put things on Sunday morning, and so on. A healthy, unified church is known by what they believe in, by the truth that they teach, the holiness of the Lord, and their unity that they have with one another. That's what the world is looking at. Division in the church, though, isn't anything new. Again, Paul talked about it there in Philippians chapter 4. There was maybe some division beginning there. It really is difficult to look through the New Testament history and to see a church that didn't experience some level of disunity or some level of discord. You remember the Corinthians that Paul addressed? I believe it's 2, probably more times in the book of Corinthians that Paul learned they're actually dividing themselves. They were doing the Lord's Supper in 1 Corinthians chapter 11. They were doing it in these little factions in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. Remember, I am Apollos, I am of Paul, I am of Cephas, I am of Christ, and so on. Even in the church at Jerusalem, you had the Judaizers, that problem with that group of people. And then the church in Ephesus probably, we assume, dealt with disunity because the way and the reason Paul talks about it so much. I mean, if you look in Ephesians chapter 4, what do we have? We have the 7 ones, because Paul is trying to show the idea of unity and how important unity is in the church. So what makes the church glorious is when God's people are unified. Our unity displays Christ to the world. It elevates the cross of Christ. It shows the world what real humility looks like. It shows them what spiritual maturity looks like. A familiar slogan that we've probably heard many times and that we probably continually need to be reminded of was coined by a German Lutheran writer in 1627. He said, "In matters of faith, unity. In matters of opinion, liberty. And in all things, love." My prayer is that we all remember the calling that we have to be the light in a dark world and to be the salt in a tasteless world. And according to Paul in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 3, may we every single day make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. Thank you all.
I've got the joy of the Lord. I'm so glad I've got the joy